What happens when one of Hollywood's biggest stars walks into what he thinks is a friendly late-night interview, only to find himself ambushed by a host with a personal vendetta? Tonight, we're diving into the shocking confrontation that left Chris Hemsworth storming off Jimmy Kimmel's set. And trust me, you're not going to believe how this whole thing unfolded. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because this story gets wilder with every minute. It started like any other Tuesday night taping at the Jimmy Kimmel Live studio. Chris Hemsworth had flown in from Australia, specifically for this appearance, promoting his latest action thriller that was set to hit theaters the following week. His publicist had confirmed the interview topics beforehand: standard stuff about the movie, his fitness routine, maybe some light banter about his family life. Nothing controversial, nothing that would ruffle feathers. That's what made what happened next so completely unexpected. Hemsworth walked onto the stage with his usual charm, that easygoing smile that had made him a fan favorite worldwide. The audience erupted in applause as he settled into the guest chair, adjusting his perfectly tailored suit jacket. He looked relaxed, maybe even a little tired from the long flight, but ready to do his job and promote the film. Jimmy Kimmel emerged from behind his desk with what appeared to be his typical grin. But those who knew him well might have noticed something different in his eyes, something harder than usual. The first few minutes played out exactly as scripted. Kimmel cracked a joke about Hemsworth's accent. Hemsworth laughed and played along, sharing a funny story about his kids confusing his Australian slang with his Marvel character's Asgardian dialogue. The audience was eating it up. Everything seemed perfectly normal. But then Kimmel shifted gears in a way that caught everyone off guard. Instead of segueing into questions about the new movie, Kimmel leaned back in his chair and fixed Hemsworth with a stare that was anything but friendly. The studio lights seemed to grow hotter as an uncomfortable silence stretched between them. You could actually hear the audience's laughter dying out, replaced by a tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. "So, Chris," Kimmel began, his voice taking on an edge that hadn't been there moments before, "I've been thinking a lot about our last conversation backstage at the Golden Globes. You remember that, don't you?" The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Hemsworth's expression shifted slightly, his media-trained smile faltering just a fraction as he clearly tried to recall what Kimmel was referring to. "I'm not sure I follow, Jimmy," Hemsworth replied carefully, his Australian accent seeming more pronounced as he measured his words. "We've chatted at a few events over the years. Which conversation are you thinking of specifically?" It was a diplomatic response, the kind of deflection that experienced celebrities use when they sense danger but aren't sure where it's coming from. Kimmel's smile grew wider, but there was nothing warm about it. "Oh, I think you know exactly which conversation I'm talking about. The one where you made some very interesting observations about late-night television. About how some hosts, and I quote, lack the intelligence to conduct real interviews with serious actors." The studio audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't the light-hearted entertainment they had come expecting. Now Hemsworth's confusion appeared genuine. His brow furrowed as he shook his head slowly. "Jimmy, I honestly don't remember saying anything like that. Are you sure you're not thinking of someone else? That doesn't sound like something I would say, especially not about you or any other host." His tone remained respectful, but there was a firmness creeping in, the sound of a man who wasn't going to be pushed around. But Kimmel wasn't backing down. If anything, he seemed to be gaining momentum, feeding off the discomfort that was now palpable throughout the studio. "Really? Because I have it on very good authority that you were quite vocal about your opinions. Something about how American talk show hosts are just glorified cheerleaders who ask softball questions because they're too intimidated by real talent." The accusation landed like a slap. Hemsworth's jaw tightened visibly, and for the first time since he'd walked onto the stage, his famous composure began to crack. That's absolutely not true. And frankly, I'm offended that you would repeat something like that without even checking if it's accurate. I've never said anything remotely close to that about you or anyone else in this business. The confrontation was escalating rapidly, and everyone in the studio could feel it. The camera operators were getting shots they never expected. The audience was watching what felt more like a boxing match than an interview. And somewhere in the control room, producers were probably having heart attacks trying to decide whether to cut to commercial or let this train wreck continue to unfold live. Kimmel leaned forward in his chair, his eyes narrowing as he prepared to deliver what felt like a calculated blow. You know what, Chris? Maybe your memory isn't as sharp as those biceps you're always showing off. Let me refresh it for you. Marcus Chen. Remember him? The entertainment reporter from Variety? He was standing right next to you when you made those comments. Ring any bells now? The host's voice dripped with mock concern, as if he was genuinely trying to help Hemsworth remember, but the malice underneath was impossible to miss. Hemsworth sat back in his chair, his hands gripping the armrests as the pieces began falling into place. Marcus Chen had indeed been at that Golden Globes after-party, and there had been a conversation, but it was nothing like what Kimmel was describing. The realization that he was being deliberately misrepresented hit him like a physical blow, and his expression hardened accordingly. Marcus Chen, Hemsworth repeated slowly, his voice taking on a dangerous quiet that anyone who had seen him play Thor would recognize. The same Marcus Chen who spent that entire evening trying to get quotes from anyone who would talk to him after he'd had about 6 drinks too many. The same guy who was asking leading questions all night, trying to manufacture controversy where none existed. His Australian accent was becoming more pronounced with each word, a sure sign that his legendary patience was wearing thin. The audience was completely silent now, sensing that they were witnessing something unprecedented. Late-night television was supposed to be fun, light entertainment to help people unwind after a long day. This felt more like watching a friendship implode in real time, except these two men had never really been friends to begin with. Kimmel's laugh was sharp and humorless. Oh, so now Marcus is a drunk and a liar? That's convenient, Chris. Really convenient. But you know what's interesting? He remembers the conversation very differently than you seem to. He remembers you being quite specific about which hosts you thought were beneath your level of sophistication. The way Kimmel emphasized the word sophistication made it sound like an insult. Jimmy, I don't know what game you're playing here, but I'm not going to sit here and let you attack my character based on the word of someone who was barely coherent that night. Hemsworth shot back, his voice rising slightly, despite his obvious efforts to maintain control. If you have a problem with me, then say it directly, instead of hiding behind some alleged conversation that's been twisted beyond recognition. That seemed to be exactly what Kimmel had been waiting for. His mask of professional civility, finally, dropped completely, revealing something ugly underneath. You want me to be direct? Fine. I think you're an overrated pretty boy who lucked into a superhero franchise and now thinks he's some kind of serious actor. I think you look down on people. Like me because we didn't go to fancy drama schools or whatever, passes for acting training in Australia these days. The studio felt like it was holding its collective breath. Even the camera operators seemed frozen, unsure whether they should keep rolling or look away from what was becoming an increasingly personal attack. Hemsworth's face had gone completely still, the kind of calm that comes right before a storm breaks. There it is, Hemsworth said quietly, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. There's what this is really about. This has nothing to do with Marcus Chen or some conversation I supposedly had. This is about you feeling insecure about your own position in this industry, and you decided to take it out on me on national television. Kimmel's face flushed red. Whether from anger or embarrassment, it was impossible to tell. Insecure? You think I'm insecure? I've been doing this job for decades while you were still trying to figure out which end of a hammer to hold. I've interviewed presidents, I've hosted award shows. I've built a career that will last long after people forget there ever was a Thor. And yet here you are, Hemsworth replied, his voice steady despite the fury that was clearly building inside him. Using your platform to ambush a guest with lies and personal attacks instead of doing the job you're supposedly so good at. You want to know what I really think about late-night hosts, Jimmy? I think the good ones understand that their job is to make their guests look good, to give the audience a reason to connect with the people they admire. The bad ones use their position to tear people down because it makes them feel powerful. The words hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down. Kimmel's hands were clenched into fists on his desk, his knuckles white with tension. You arrogant piece of work. You think you can come on my show and lecture me about how to do my job? This is my house, Chris. My show. My rules. And if I want to ask you hard questions about your attitude problem, that's exactly what I'm going to do. Hard questions. Hemsworth's laugh was bitter. Is that what you call repeating gossip and making personal attacks? Because where I come from, we call that bullying. And I didn't fly halfway around the world to be bullied by someone who's supposed to be a professional. The situation was spiraling completely out of control now. What had started as a standard promotional interview had become a full-scale verbal warfare, with both men seemingly past the point of caring about the cameras, the audience, or the consequences of their words. The studio lights felt scorching hot, and the air seemed thick enough to swim through. Kimmel stood up from behind his desk, a move that was clearly designed to intimidate. You know what, Chris? Maybe we should just end this right here. Maybe you should take your attitude and your lectures about professionalism and find somewhere else to promote your little movie. But Hemsworth wasn't backing down. If anything, Kimmel's attempt at intimidation seemed to steel his resolve. He remained seated, but his posture straightened, and when he spoke, his voice carried the kind of authority that comes from years of commanding movie sets and leading major productions. No, Jimmy. You started this, and now you're going to finish it. You ambushed me with false accusations. You've insulted my intelligence, my career, and my character, all while hiding behind your desk and your home field advantage. If you want to have this conversation, then let's have it properly. But don't you dare try to dismiss me now that I'm finally giving you the response you were obviously fishing for. The challenge was unmistakable, and the entire studio seemed to lean forward in anticipation of what would happen next. This was no longer just an interview gone wrong. This was two alpha personalities locked in a battle of wills, with neither one willing to be the first to blink. Kimmel's face was now a deep shade of crimson, and his breathing had become noticeably heavier. The studio audience was so quiet you could hear the hum of the electrical equipment, everyone sensing that they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years to come. The host slowly sat back down, but his movements were rigid, controlled, like a predator preparing to strike. You want to finish this conversation, Chris? Perfect. Let's talk about your real problem with American television. Let's talk about how you've been telling people in your inner circle that you're too good for shows like mine, that you only do them because your publicist makes you, because it's beneath someone of your, quote-unquote, artistic caliber. Kimmel's voice had dropped to a dangerous whisper, but every word carried perfectly through the studio's sound system. Hemsworth's eyes flashed with genuine anger now. That's enough, Jimmy. You're not just twisting my words anymore. You're flat out inventing them. I have never, not once, said anything like that about your show or any other show. What you're doing right now is defamation, and if you had any integrity left, you'd admit it. Integrity? Kimmel's laugh was harsh and grating. That's rich coming from someone who's built his entire career on wearing a cape and swinging a hammer around. Tell me, Chris, when was the last time you did anything that required actual acting skill? When was the last time you took a role that challenged you instead of just showing off your gym routine? The personal attack seemed to flip a switch in Hemsworth. His Australian accent became almost impossibly thick as his voice rose to match Kimmel's aggression. You want to talk about my acting? Fine. Let's talk about it. I've worked with some of the best directors in the world. I've carried billion-dollar franchises. I've done independent films that you probably never even heard of because you're too busy making jokes about celebrities' personal lives to actually pay attention to. The craft. The craft. Kimmel was standing again now, his hands planted firmly on his desk as he leaned toward his guest. What craft? Looking good without a shirt? Reading lines that were written by teams of writers while computers create all the action. Around you? That's not craft, Chris. That's modeling with dialogue. The insult was so blatant, so deliberately designed to wound, that even some audience members audibly gasped. Hemsworth's jaw was clenched so tight it looked like it might crack, and when he finally spoke, his voice was deadly quiet. You know what, Jimmy? You've just shown everyone exactly what kind of person you really are. You've shown them that when you can't win an argument with facts, you resort to personal attacks. When you can't make a point with intelligence, you try to tear down someone else's accomplishments. And most importantly, you've shown them that you're willing to ambush a guest on your own show because you're too much of a coward to have this conversation anywhere else. Kimmel's response was immediate and vicious. Coward? I'm not the one who hides behind a fictional character, because his real personality isn't interesting enough for audiences to care about. I'm not the one whose biggest claim to fame is being born with good genetics and an accent that Americans think sounds exotic. That was the final straw. Hemsworth stood up so abruptly that his chair rolled backward several feet. His imposing frame seemed to fill the entire stage as he faced down. The host, who had just crossed every line of professional decorum. That's it. This interview is over. I'm not going to sit here and be insulted by someone who clearly has no respect for his guests, his audience, or his own profession. But Kimmel wasn't finished. As Hemsworth began to remove his microphone, the host delivered what he clearly intended to be a knockout blow. Running away, Chris? I guess that's what happens when someone finally calls you out on your pretensions. Can't handle a real conversation with someone who isn't paid to kiss your ass? Hemsworth froze, his hands still working on the microphone. Clip. For a moment, it seemed like he might actually leave without another word. Then he turned back to face Kimmel, and his expression was unlike anything the audience had ever seen from the typically affable actor. You want to know what running away looks like, Jimmy? Running away is what you did when you decided to ambush me, instead of having an honest conversation. Running away is what you do every night when you hide behind scripted jokes instead of engaging with your guests like a real interviewer. And running away is what you're going to have to do when this footage goes viral and people see exactly what kind of host you really are. The threat was unmistakable, and Kimmel's face went pale despite his obvious rage. Are you threatening me? On my own show? I'm not threatening you, Hemsworth replied, his voice now completely calm despite the storm raging in his eyes. I'm promising you that your behavior tonight will have consequences. You've just shown millions of people that you're willing to lie about your guests, attack their careers, and destroy the trust that's supposed to exist between a host and the people. Brave enough to sit in that chair, Kimmel made one last desperate attempt to regain control of the situation. Security! I want this man removed from my studio immediately. He's being disruptive and threatening. But Hemsworth was already walking toward the exit, his microphone pack left behind on the guest chair. As he reached the edge of the stage, he turned back one final time, his voice carrying clearly across the stunned silence. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize that you had to witness this. You came here expecting entertainment, and instead, you got to see what happens when someone abuses their position of power. I hope you'll remember this the next time someone tries to tell you that all publicity is good publicity. Because what happened here tonight was just ugly. With that, Chris Hemsworth walked off the Jimmy Kimmel live stage, leaving behind a host whose career would never quite recover from the night he let his personal jealousies destroy his professional reputation. The audience sat in shocked silence as Kimmel struggled to find words that could somehow salvage the disaster he had created. And there you have it, the inside story of the night Chris Hemsworth exposed Jimmy Kimmel's true colors on national television. Make sure to subscribe for more behind-the-scenes Hollywood drama, and let me know in the comments. Do you think Hemsworth was right to walk out, or should he have stayed and continued the fight?